Okay, in this video we're going to go through an example involving the Hamilton's apportionment. So here we have a fictional example in which we have various planets from Star Wars. So essentially we have kind of a little intergalactic senate here. And we have 477 seats in this galactic senate. And for each of the planets we have recorded their population. So what we want to do is determine the number of seats that each planet should receive using Hamilton's method. So first we have to determine the total population of all the planets combined. So we're using an Excel spreadsheet here so we can do these calculations more quickly. But we would just take all the populations and add them all up. So we do that, and there's our total population. And now we need to compute the standard divisor. So that is obtained by taking the total population and dividing by the number of seats, which is 477. So we take the population divided by the number of seats, and that's our standard divisor. Okay, so now what we have to do is compute the standard quota for each of the planets in our system. And so we do that by taking the population of that planet and dividing it by the standard divisor. Okay, so we take the population of Bespin and divide it by the standard divisor. And now we're just going to do the same thing for each of the other planets. So we can use Excel to calculate. And there it goes. It goes ahead and fills them in for us. But for each one we can see, for example, for Coruscant, what we're doing is taking the population of 1,549,544 and dividing by the standard divisor of 93,655.92. Okay, so now for each of those standard divisors we have a lower quota and an upper quota. So remember, the lower quota is we just round down to the closest integer. So for 20.5904 we would just round it down to 20. 16.5451 becomes 16, and so for each of those we just round it down and enter that into the table. Okay, so there's our lower quota. So in this case all of the quotas were greater than 1. If any of the quotas had been less than 1, we would have encountered a 0 when we did the lower quota. So suppose we had some planet whose standard quota had been just 0.85, for example. Then their lower quota, namely when we round down, we would have just gotten 0. So now for upper quotas, we're just going to take the standard quota, but now we're going to round it up to the closest integer. For Coruscant, the standard quota of 16.5451 goes up to 17. And so here we're always rounding it up. Okay, so here we have all the lower quotas and all the upper quotas. So now notice that if you look at the lower quotas, so now if you look at the standard quotas, what this is trying to determine is how many seats each planet should receive. The problem is that each planet is receiving possibly a fractional number of seats, right? So for example, Bespin is getting 20.5904. So in that case what we're saying is Bespin should certainly get at least 20 seats, but they should also get just a little bit over half of a seat. But of course we can't give fractions of a seat, and so the question is, what do we actually give Bespin? Do we give them 20, or do we round it up to 21, or something else? So remember that Hamilton's method says that we start out by giving everybody their lower quota, right? And that should be kind of uncontroversial, right? You do the standard quota, that's saying how many seats they should get, but there's this, you're getting this fractional number of seats sometimes, and so by just rounding it down and getting the lower quotas, that part is saying, well, they at least get, so for example, Bespin at least gets 20 seats, and Coruscant at least gets 16 seats, and so on. And now if we look at the sum of all the lower quotas, we have 474. But the actual number of seats in our Galactic Senate is 477. So that means we have 3 seats left to give out, and we have to determine how we're going to do that. And Hamilton's method says that we give the seats out based on the fractional part. So for each of the planets, we're going to record their fractional part. So for example, Bespin, if we look at the standard quota, it's 20.5904. So the fractional part is just the 0.5904. And for Coruscant, it's 0.5451. Then we have 0.2111 for Dagobah, and so on. Okay, so now we've entered the fractional parts for each of the planets. So now what Hamilton's method says is we look at the fractional parts and we use that to determine the remaining seats. Right? So I said that since all the lower quotas total to 474 and the number of seats we actually have is 477, we have to give out 3 extra seats. And the way we're going to do that is by looking at the fractional parts. Namely, we're going to rank the fractional parts from largest to smallest, and then we're going to give the extra 3 remaining seats. We're going to give one to the largest fractional part, and then so on down the line until we've run out of seats. So as we look at this, we see that the largest fractional part is clearly Bespin with 0.5904, and so they would get an extra seat. So that means what they would do, what happens is they get the lower quota of 20, but they get an extra seat because their fractional part is the largest. So in fact, they would be rounded up to 21. And then we go down the line, we say, okay, who's the next largest fractional part? So as we look at the possible options, it's Coruscant with 0.5451. So their lower quota was 16, but now they're going to pick up an additional seat as well to go up to 17. And now we have one seat left over, right? We had 3 extra seats to give out. We gave one to Bespin, then we gave the next one to Coruscant, and there's one more to give out, so we have to look at the next largest fractional part, and we see that's 0.5301 for Geonosis. So their lower quota was 20, and so they would get 21. So now we've given out the 3 extra seats, and so everybody else just gets their lower quota. So we go ahead and enter those. And there we have it. And so now if you look at this, this red column here called Hamilton apportionment, you can see that now we have the 477 seats. Right? So we gave everybody their lower quota, gave us only 474 seats being given out with 3 extra seats. We looked at the fractional parts, ranked them from largest to smallest, and using that we gave out 3 extra seats, one to Bespin, one to Coruscant, and one to Geonosis. And so this final column is what we actually call the Hamilton apportionment. That is the actual number of seats given out to each planet that gets us to the right number of seats.